We all know about the infamous 2017 Browns, '08 Lions, and '76 Bucks, all of which failed to win a single game. At least the Bucks can claim being an expansion team. For the Lions and Browns, they're never escaping the legacy of those disastrous seasons. Those 0-win seasons will never die. But what about the teams that only had one win? In the Super Bowl era, 11 teams have won just a single game, barely escaping 0-win immortality. As far as talent goes, these 11 terrible teams were at about the same level of those 0-win teams, and by some metrics, a few were worse. This is the breakdown of every 1-win NFL team and how long they took to recover. Now, it's difficult to recover from 1-15. But what's much easier is clearing up your skin with today's video sponsor, Geology. I've always had a hard time sticking to a skincare routine, but for the last month, I've been super consistent with it, in large part because of how easy Geology's routine has been for me. It starts with a 60-second quiz. Tell them about your skin goals, and they will develop a derm-grade personalized routine and deliver it right to your door. When I took the quiz, I got the regimen number 26. And the routine starts when I wake up with the everyday face wash for 30 seconds. And after rinsing, I apply the morning cream, which has my face feeling fresh and moisturized for the day. Then at night, I use the face wash once again. Then after rinsing, I apply the nourishing eye cream under my eyes. Then finally, I spread a dab of the repairing night cream equally across my face. Boom, easy as that. I have my face feeling clean and fresh to end my day. Geology prides itself on efficacy. It's not just about looking and feeling good, it's about delivering results. And with over 10,000 5-star reviews and 32 prestigious awards, it's clear that people love the product and that Geology is changing the game. So what are you waiting for? Don't sift through endless products. Click the link below and use my code KTO70 and grab 70% off your personalized skincare trial set. Also remember this, there's a 50% off on add-ons waiting for you.
Definitely not the key word in New Orleans, as this 25-year-old Saint fan has aged far beyond her years. A result of New Orleans' 1980 season.
The 1980 Saints were coming off of the franchise's best season ever, going 8-8 in year 13. 1980 was one of the first seasons experts almost unanimously saw the Saints as a playoff team. But instead of changing the reputation of this organization, they instead won just a single game. At times, their offense, led by Archie Manning, was decent, but due to their horrifically bad defense, they were often giving up 30 and even 40+ points. After starting 0-14, their single win was a come-from-behind last-minute touchdown against the Jets to win by a single point. Even with how bad this season had gone, the Saints were thrilled to avoid infamy. They had another game that season where they were ahead of the 49ers 35-7.5, but they ended up losing to the largest comeback in NFL history at the time. Many fans took to wearing bags over their heads when attending games. The moniker Aints was also born due to the ineptitude of the 1980 Saints. Following the season, the team replaced head coach Dick Nolan with Bum Phillips, and with the number 1 overall pick, the Saints decided to go offense and drafted Heisman-winning running back George Rogers. Rogers went on to have a solid career, but when you see who they passed up on, it hurts. In 1991, despite their rookie running back setting rookie rushing records, the Saints continued to struggle, finishing 4-12. It took the Saints another 2 seasons to achieve a winning record, and another 4 seasons after that to finally make the playoffs for the first time ever.
You in the Dallas area, you gotta still be reeling over the events of this past weekend. Tom Landry has been ousted.
The 1989 Cowboys were in a massive pivot as a franchise. After suffering major personal losses financially, Bum Bright sold the team to Jerry Jones. Jones then fired head coach Tom Landry, who had been with the organization for 29 years. Despite the team's performance seeing a decline in recent years, this decision to fire him received immediate backlash because Landry was a legend in those parts. He had been the only coach in Cowboys history, and to have him fired just felt wrong. Jerry Jones replaced Landry with Miami Hurricanes head coach Jimmy Johnson, and Jones from there continued to make some franchise-altering decisions. He drafted quarterback Troy Aikman #1 overall, and during the '89 season, he traded the star of their offense, Herschel Walker, for a few players and a massive amount of draft capital. The play here was clear. This team would suffer in 1989 for the sake of the future. And in Jimmy Johnson's first season, this team possessed the worst scoring offense in the NFL and were outscored by an average of 12 points a game, winning one singular contest versus the Washington Redskins midway through the season. The Cowboys looked like no match for the Redskins on paper, as Washington had been favored by 2 touchdowns at home, but costly turnovers were the difference in an ugly, low-scoring affair. When the season was finished, it was deemed a massive failure, and you can imagine the scrutiny Jerry Jones was under. To make matters more depressing for fans, legendary player Ed Too Tall Jones retired following the season. The team was so bad entering 1990 that they were projected to win around 4 games. In the 1990 NFL Draft, they used a first-round pick on Florida running back Emmitt Smith, who held out during training camp and didn't do much early in the season, and the team disappointed through 10 games. But they turned a corner in November and finished 7-9. Their defense had improved substantially, and by the end, Emmitt Smith looked like what they had hoped. This upwards trajectory continued as these players began to build chemistry. Troy Aikman improved in 1991, and in 1992, the Cowboys produced a top 5 offense and defense, going on to win the Super Bowl, and they did it again in 1993 and 1995. This meant they had completed this rebuild in spectacular fashion.
The 1990 New England Patriots were bad on the field and in some ways even worse off it.
After finding success in the mid-'80s, the Patriots disappointed in 1989, going 5-11 and firing head coach Raymond Berry. The team hired Rod Rust as his replacement, who had helped the Patriots develop a top 5 defense years back as a defensive coordinator. As a first-time head coach, Rust and the Patriots traded Stanley Morgan, the team's best receiver ever to that point. Other than that, the roster mostly stayed the same, but their key players were in the twilights of their careers, and their age really showed in 1990. At first, the season didn't look too bad when the team jumped out to a 1-1 start with a 2-point win over the Colts. But this win was completely overshadowed by something that took place following the game.
Recently, it was reported that Boston Herald sports reporter Lisa Olson was sexually harassed in the locker room of the New England Patriots.
Long story short, a series of events that took place in the Patriots locker room eventually led to an investigation, and this situation loomed over the Patriots all season. It had clearly been a huge distraction leading up to their Week 3 contest versus the Bengals, where they were blown out 41-7. This set the tone for the rest of the season, as they lost by over 20 points 7 times and failed to win another game. The offense was atrocious, finishing dead last in points per game. The defense wasn't any better, allowing the second most points per game. And overall, the 1990 Patriots lost by an average of nearly 17 points, worse than both the '08 Lions and 2017 Browns. There was this one game where they were down 9-0 before the opponent even ran an offensive play. This was due to a fumble return touchdown and a snap that went out of the end zone for a safety. Rod Rust ended up being fired and was replaced by Syracuse head coach Dick McPherson. Expected to be the worst team in 1991, the Patriots did better than expected, improving mostly on the defensive side of the ball and winning 6 games. But they quickly fell back into the pit of despair, going 2-14 the following year. But that's when everything changed. They went on to hire a competent coach in Bill Parcells, who ended up drafting Drew Bledsoe, and within 4 years, this team had made it to a Super Bowl. Now, on the flip side of all these disastrous seasons, being the one franchise that loses to one of these atrocious teams is infamous in its own right. You're officially known as the only guys who lost to the biggest loser. And that team in 1990 was the Colts. But this was the least of their woes at the time.
New England went in there and shocked the Colts.
The Patriots, it got everybody believing on this team in Dick McPherson. They've been very competitive.
And they have steadily improved, whereas the Colts have gone down.
The 80s and 90s were a pretty dreadful era to be a Colts fan. They were consistent bottom dwellers in the 80s, with just one playoff appearance. Then, at the turn of the decade, they were the only team to lose to the Patriots in 1990. Then, in 1991, they took their place. The team got off to an 0-8 start. Their second-year quarterback, Jeff George, struggled, as the offense put up 7 points just once in those first 8 games. This awful run led to the firing of head coach Ron Meyer. In his absence, the team was able to scrap together a 1-point win against the Jets before returning to their losing ways. What's crazy about that game was the Jets had over 150 more yards, 2 less turnovers, and completely dominated time of possession. Yet, they lost. The Colts going into that game hadn't scored in 5 games, and they ended up having 3 in the third quarter alone. By the end of 1991, the Colts finished 1-15 with one of the worst offenses in NFL history, at just 8.9 points per game. This was the fewest points scored in a 16-game season. They lost by an average of 14.9 points per game, worse than the 0-16 Cleveland Browns. They failed to score a single touchdown in 9 of their 16 games, which remains the largest proportion of games without scoring a touchdown since the 77 Bucks. The following year, the Colts hired Ted Marchibroda, who was once a decent coach for the team in the late 70s. Under his leadership, they instantly found success, going a surprising 9-7 in 1992. But it wasn't like their team was all of a sudden stacked with talent. Football Outsiders calls this 1992 Colts team possibly the luckiest team in NFL history, due to the Colts ranking as the second worst team in the NFL statistically that season. The Colts had finished 9-7 even though they were outscored by almost 100 points. They quickly fell back near the bottom in 1993, and it wasn't until 1995 where the team returned to the playoffs and the AFC Championship. Now, like I said, it hurts to be the only guys that lose to the 1-15 team. So far, 2 of the 4 teams I've mentioned that fell victim to this were the Jets. And in 1996, they joined the other side.
You have to wonder on the Jets sideline, are they saying, uh-oh, here we go again?
Entering 1996, the Jets were looking for a new direction. They had been bad for years, with zero stability at head coach. Under second-year head coach Rich Kotite, the team decided to try and improve their offense. They moved on from quarterback Boomer Esiason and signed Neil O'Donnell, who had just led the Steelers to a Super Bowl appearance. They also drafted wide receiver Keyshawn Johnson with the #1 overall pick. Along with a bunch of other offensive additions, the Jets spent $70 million in the offseason on free agents and rookie contracts, which is worth around $140 million today. But these changes didn't improve the offense like they had hoped. In 1996, O'Donnell started just 6 games before suffering a season-ending injury. After limping their way to an 0-8 start, everything went the Jets' way against the Cardinals when they cruised to a 10-point victory. The Jets finished 1-15, with the average point differential of 11 points a game. Head coach Rich Kotite resigned, and for the second time in this video, Bill Parcells came in to save the day. Now, listen to this story. Parcells coached the Patriots in 1996 and led them to a Super Bowl appearance. But in the midst of that run, news got around that the Jets were courting Parcells to take over the following season. Of course, the Patriots were pissed about this. And this is what Parcells said prior to leaving New England regarding the Patriots' unwillingness to give him more of a say in football matters.
And I'm not trying to be cute here, okay? I'm just going to say, they want you to cook the dinner, at least they ought to let you shop for some of the groceries. Parcells
announced his resignation after the season, but was restricted by his contract with the Patriots, which prohibited him from coaching elsewhere until it ended. To navigate this, the Jets hired Bill Belichick, Parcells' top assistant, as head coach, who brought Parcells in on an advisory role. The Patriots were displeased and raised concerns with the league. Ultimately, the commissioner facilitated an agreement allowing Parcells to coach the Jets in exchange for sending the Patriots the Jets' first-round draft pick the following year. With the #1 pick in 1997, it looked like the Patriots had a chance to draft Tennessee quarterback Peyton Manning. But Manning decided to return for his senior year. Just imagine how that would have played out. They ended up trading the pick, and for the Parcells years, well, immediately things got better. By year 2, they reached the conference championship for the first time in 15 years. But then Parcells retired after a tough 1999 season. Belichick then took the job for a total of 1 day before leaving to the Patriots.
The second choice in the draft, the San Diego Chargers select quarterback, Washington State University, Ryan Leaf.
Ryan, what do you bring to the Chargers on the field?
Hopefully just an emotion and hopefully some leadership and just a heart and soul of a great work ethic, I hope.
In their second season under Mike Riley, the Chargers were expected to be an average level team like they were the year before. The difference was quarterback Ryan Leaf, the team's #1 pick in 1998, didn't play in 1999 due to injury and was now healthy to reassume the starting role. If he could show some maturation in his game, the Chargers may have had potential to be a playoff contender. Well, things went about as bad as they could have. Leaf proved not to be a capable NFL quarterback. By November, he publicly speculated that the Chargers would release him after the season. And later that month, reports suggested that Leaf had lied about his wrist injury to get out of practice and play golf instead. After starting 0-11, the Chargers managed to eke out a 1-point victory over the Chiefs with a last-minute field goal. This ended up being the final win of Leaf's career. The team finished 1-15 and released Leaf following the season. The Chargers lost by an average of 10.7 points per game. 2001 was a fresh start. Entering the draft, the Chargers had the chance to take Mike Vick, but chose to trade that pick to the Falcons and drafted LaDainian Tomlinson instead, and later, Drew Brees. These two became pivotal cornerstones for the team's rebuild. And 3 years after that 1-15 season, the Chargers made the postseason with an impressive 12-4 record. Despite letting Brees go after that, they went on to make the playoffs 4 more times in the next 5 years, but never made it to the Super Bowl.
Well, anytime you're leading in the fourth quarter in the NFL, you think you want to hand the ball off to your running back, chew up the clock, chew up the yardage. They don't have a running back that can do that, and quite frankly, they don't have a running game that can do that.
Led by 4th-round Heisman-winning rookie quarterback Chris Weinke, things got off to a solid start in 2001 for the Panthers, when they won on opening day by double digits over the Vikings. This was an impressive victory, considering the Vikings had played in the conference championship the year before. However, shortly thereafter, things turned sour. The Panthers went on to become the first team to lose 15 consecutive games after winning on opening day. This team proved to be horrendous, but out of all the teams so far, they had the closest of games, but just couldn't find ways to win. They lost 9 games within 1 score. The Panthers had become so awful that overall they lost by an average of 9.8 points per game. As disappointing as this season was, rookie 3rd-rounder Steve Smith showed promise. He was named first-team All-Pro as a punt returner, and later would become a cornerstone player for the franchise. Following the 2001 season, the Panthers fired head coach George Seifert in favor of John Fox, and Chris Weinke was replaced by veteran journeyman Rodney Peete. And things improved a lot in 2002. But the following season was truly a shocker. With undrafted backup quarterback Jake Delhomme, the Panthers would go on an improbable run to the Super Bowl before losing to the Patriots.
I'm not going to be the Alabama coach. What? I shouldn't even have to comment on this. I think I've said this over and over and over again.
Coming off the disappointing 2006 season, Nick Saban repeatedly told everyone he wasn't going to Alabama, before ultimately going to Alabama. Because of this, the Dolphins had to start over and hired first-time head coach Cam Cameron, who had had success as the Chargers OC, considering LaDainian Tomlinson had that MVP season in 2006. The Saban situation had kicked off what would be considered a rough offseason for the Dolphins. New signee Joey Porter got into an altercation in Las Vegas in March. Defensive tackle Fred Evans was arrested in June, which led him to being waived from the team. Then another 2 players would get arrested, including Pro Bowl wide receiver Chris Chambers. So with all that, plus a huge overhaul of the coaching staff, the Dolphins entered the 2007 season in murky waters. After an overtime loss on opening day, the Dolphins would drop their next 12 games, 7 of which were by double digits, with arguably the worst quarterback play in the league. Closing in on the 0-16 season, the Dolphins found themselves with a 3-point lead on the Ravens in the final minute. But after this completion, the Ravens had a 4th and goal at the half-yard line. Instead of going for it, they decided to kick it, sending the game to overtime, where the Dolphins won the game on a long touchdown. They were half a yard from 0-16. Overall, the 2007 Dolphins were outscored by 10.6 points a game. The season ended with Cam Cameron getting fired, and another overhaul of the coaching staff. And then, once again, who was brought in to save the day? Bill Parcells. Apparently, he's the king of the 1-15 rebuild. The only difference this time was, instead of head coach, he was brought in as the executive vice president of football operations. One of the first moves that was made was bringing in quarterback Chad Pennington as the new starter. And under new head coach Tony Sparano, the Dolphins completed one of the greatest single-season turnarounds in NFL history in terms of regular season wins. They went from 1-15 to 11-5. This thrilling turnaround was short-lived, as they missed the postseason in 2009 and wouldn't make it again until 2016.
Middle of the field, in and out of the hands of Brown, intercepted. That's James Butler. He's in the end zone. Now, wait a minute, that's a safety.
To be a Rams fan in the late 2000s and early 2010s was truly a test of patience. They were terrible. In 2007, they went 3-13. In 2008, 2-14. And in 2009, they produced one of the worst statistical teams in NFL history. Their offense was essentially carried on the back of Steven Jackson. But other than him, this offense was a nightmare. Jackson produced all 4 of their rushing touchdowns, which was the lowest in the NFL. Their 3-headed monster at quarterback produced 11 total touchdowns and 21 interceptions. With the worst offense in football and the second worst scoring defense in football, the Rams finished 1-15, with their lone victory coming against the Lions. It took a fake field goal touchdown and a spectacular game by Steven Jackson, who scored the game-winning touchdown with a minute left. Now, this is a pretty significant game because the Lions were coming off that infamous 0-16 season, and although they did win 2 games in 2009, they were the only team to lose to the Rams that year, which just adds to the embarrassment of their 2008 season. One funny thing to add to this was each team's infamous blooper. Dan Orlovsky ran out of the back of the end zone, and for the Rams, coincidentally, theirs came against the Lions, where their player intercepted the ball, then ran back into the end zone for a safety. So the 2009 Rams escaped infamy. But what's crazy is statistically, they were worse than both the 2017 Browns and 2008 Lions, losing by an average of 16.4 points per game. That's essentially getting blown out every single game. The 2010 Rams saw the turning of a new leaf, as they went on to select quarterback Sam Bradford #1 overall. At first, things were promising. They won 7 games, improving on both sides of the ball. But they quickly fell back on their losing ways, as they went 2-14 in 2011 and did not achieve another good season until the franchise moved to Los Angeles.
No, I'm not going 1-15. No. Well, I'll be swimming in the lake over there somewhere.
Many months later.
The Hugh Jackson era in Cleveland was a miserable time. In fact, I've made an entire video on just how terrible it was. Coming off a 3-13 season, the team hired Hugh Jackson in 2016 and implemented a new analytics approach to roster building. This involved the team getting rid of their most valuable veterans and gathered many draft picks for later drafts. This approach resulted in catastrophic results on the football field, with 5 different quarterbacks and another former quarterback turned receiver throwing passes. The Browns lost their first 14 games, and by all means, looked headed towards the infamous 0-16 season. But in week 16, they escaped this fate when Chargers kicker Josh Lambo missed a last-second field goal to send it to overtime. Then, after an overtime loss to the Steelers' backups, the Browns finished 1-15, losing by an average of 11.8 points per game. How did they respond? Well, despite drafting Myles Garrett #1 overall, they somehow did worse, failing to win a single game in 2017. One of the reasons this happened was because they continued to ride with rookie DeShone Kizer at quarterback, who was clearly not ready to be a starter, but for the sake of the tank, they kept him in. Oddly enough, the 2017 Browns had a better point differential than the 2016 Browns. It wouldn't be until 2020, where the suffering of those two horrible seasons finally resulted in a playoff appearance and victory for the Browns.
Jalen Ramsey has been traded to the Los Angeles Rams, 24 years old, in his prime.
Speaking of 2020, by the time this season rolled around, the Jaguars' incredible run to the 2017 AFC title game felt like a distant memory. They had quickly returned to football hell, winning 5 games in 2018 and 6 in 2019. 2020 would be the cherry on top. After possessing the second best scoring defense in 2017, they had the second worst, along with the most pathetic offense in the league in 2020. What's crazy was, like the 0-1 Panthers, they started 1-0 before losing their next 15 games. That one win came against the Colts, with a pretty awesome performance by Gardner Minshew. But overall, the Jags lost by an average of 11.7 points per game, which was worse than the 0-16 Browns. With all the great players they shipped out of town before and during the season, it couldn't have been more obvious that this team was tanking. And for their efforts, they had the rights to draft Trevor Lawrence. After drafting Lawrence, within 2 years, they had reached the postseason and won a playoff game. But that success has appeared to be short-lived, as the Jaguars look like one of the worst teams in the NFL in 2024.